So, just to put the seminar in context, I thought it might be helpful to reflect for a moment on the impact of COVID-19 on young children in Jersey. And the Best Start Partnership recently did a survey of families with young children, including young children themselves. So, if Joe can move on to the next slide, you'll see the kinds of questions that we invited children to respond to. And the responses to the first question were predominantly the word sad. You know, how did you feel? I felt really sad. I cried at first because I was scared. I missed the parks, I missed the zoo, and the playgrounds were closed. But then on the other side, there were some children who said they were happy because they could just play with their toys all day. And actually another child who said, I didn't really like going to nursery and I like spending more time with daddy. I like going to nursery now though. So hopefully that's moved forwards. As of how did you feel when you couldn't see your friends and family? The word sad came up again. You know, I couldn't see. I wanted to see my grandma and grandpa. What did you think of the virus? Well, it's dangerous. It's naughty. It's a bad superbug. We have to keep washing our hands and we have to give people lots of space. I want it to go away. It's horrible. And when the virus came to Jersey, you know, you had to stop doing things. What did you miss doing? I miss going on the bus. I miss seeing Granny. I miss my friends. That came time and time again. I miss going to the playground and I missed having ice creams. So we also asked children for a few hints and tips really in terms of, you know, if you were going to start a new school or nursery after lockdown, what would make it exciting? And predominantly the responses were playing with new toys and making new friends. But then there was a child who took the real initiative and said, actually, I'd like a fire engine at our school. So we looked too at the impact of COVID on parents in Jersey. So on the next slide, you can see the responses that we got from parents. So I won't read those through because, you know, you can get the clear messages in terms of concerns about children's play and children's behaviour. And these are messages from parents, but also the impact on parental well-being in terms of, you know, how the last few months have affected you. And that balance between all those stressful things and then actually the positive of spending more time as a family. And we've also got anecdotal reports from practitioners who suggest that the bubble system is a struggle, you know, not just for children's sake, but for their own. They miss the banter, they miss the biscuits, they miss the camaraderie, they miss the support, and they miss the hugs. So moving forward today, I'm going to hand over to Jill Holden from NCB, and Jill will introduce, and I'm delighted to say that she will introduce Jill, that Jill will introduce Debbie and will share her experience with you, and hopefully will comment on those very real life observations from children, families and practitioners in Jersey. So thank you, Jill.
Hi, Kathy. Thank you very much for that introduction, and good evening, everybody. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. Absolutely amazed and fabulous that we've been able to put on an extra seminar. And so the topic for tonight came from lots of feedback that we had from the previous topic, the last seminar that we did in June, and from practitioners who've got in touch with me about how they feel this is such a really important topic, particularly at the moment. So let me just see if I can get the slides to work and click on. So I'm just going to give you a very brief update around the Early Childhood Development Programme. So we're now fast approaching 5 years of delivering what's been a hugely successful programme, and lots of amazing work has taken place over this last 5 years. So for that as well, I'd like to pass on my thanks on behalf of everyone at the National Children's Bureau to everybody for all your hard work, enthusiasm and dedication, for all those who've been involved in the programme. On my visits to Jersey, I've had the pleasure of meeting some of the most enthusiastic real practitioners that I've ever met, and sharing all the stories with you about all the activities that you've done with the children and families. Have just been brilliant. I've really enjoyed that. I'd also like to give my thanks to everybody else who supported the programme. So Nicola and a team from the early years team from the Government of Jersey, Fiona and Kate and everybody at Jersey Childcare Trust, and of course Kathy and all of the Best Start Partnership. So our current pot of funding is due to conclude in March, and we are of course continuing to work behind the scenes exploring ways to extend the funding. However, one of our big focuses, as I've said on this slide here for now, is making sure that we have a legacy in Jersey from this programme, and I know with all the enthusiasm that that's absolutely going to be the case. So what's been going on recently? Well, in October, Kathy and Julie delivered a really successful Training for Trainers session in Making It Real. That was innovational in that we used technology to Zoom Kathy in from over here, and Julie was there face-to-face in Pip's place as well. So the evaluations from that training have said to me that that was really, really well received, and went really well and really smoothly. One practitioner said they felt like Kathy was actually there in the room as well, so that's absolutely brilliant. And I know it will have taken a lot of hard work in getting that up and running. We've got some more training opportunities coming up soon, which I've got another slide to show you. And I know that just last night was the first session of the Sharing Real with Parents training for trainers. And just as we were chatting before we started tonight, Kathy was saying one of the people who attended that left that saying she felt they were absolutely fizzing. And that's just music to my ears. That's absolutely awesome that it's having such that impact. So brilliant. So going forward, we appreciate that flexibility is going to be the name of the game as everybody tries to work together and negotiate our way through the pandemic. So although we've got some dates in the diary, we also appreciate that we might need to have some flexibility around this. Unfortunately, in the current circumstances, we don't know what's around the corner. So I'm really pleased that practitioners have been able to continue delivering their real programmes, so the projects of the literacy projects and the maths projects. So a cohort was coming to the end at October half term, and the next cohort is due to come to an end in December, just before Christmas. So really, really looking forward to seeing the project paperwork from that and seeing all the impact that it's made. And that's all coming in at a really vital time at the programme, because we're about to engage on the external evaluation, which I'll talk about again in a moment. So ongoing work, as I've just said there, looking at the projects and looking at how we can make sure we've got things in place to socially distance to carry on delivery in case that's needed. So this slide here just tells you the dates that we've got scheduled in at the moment. If you're interested, or you know somebody else who's interested in any of these, please do get in touch with Kate at JCCT, and she'll be able to book you a place on those. And like I say, we are looking at around flexibility just in case as well. So like I said, the external evaluation, sorry, just changed my slide there. So we're really delighted that once again, we've managed to get CREC. So Chris Pascal and Tony Bertram at CREC are going to be doing our external evaluation. So they're already really familiar with the programme, what's been going on over the last 5 years, because of course they did the last evaluation. So really looking forward to working with them again on this. If any of you out there are interested in being part of a focus group, or we'll have a parental focus group as well. So if you know parents that would be really keen for that, please do drop us a line and get in touch, and we'll send out some information via the newsletter and via Kate nearer the time when we're looking for that as well. Okay, so I am absolutely delighted, like I said, that we're able to put on this extra seminar with a focus that's so vital in early childhood sector at the moment, particularly at this time. So those of you who attended our seminar in June with Jan de Biel will know that tonight's messages follow on very closely to that as well, looking at that real focus on how we can support children through difficult times and how we can support each other. So if you've not seen Jan's presentation, that is available both on the NCB website and on the Best Start Partnership website. If you can't find links, again, just give us a shout and we can share those. So without further ado, the reason you're here tonight, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce Debbie to you. I've had the pleasure of working with Debbie over a good number of years on various other programs, projects and things, probably longer than both of us here at Case to both of us are keen to admit. So Debbie she has a huge passion for promoting emotional health and well-being of both adults and children. After Debbie's presentation, as Kathy has mentioned, there's going to be time for some questions and answers. So please do post those in the chat box. NCB here, we're monitoring that and we will collate those questions ready to pose those at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Debbie. She's an author, she's a trainer, she's, like I say, hugely passionate about the science and the evidence behind neuroscience and child development, and an absolutely generally lovely all-round lovely person. So I'm going to hand over to Debbie. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Now we do the technology bit.
So Debbie can share her screen. Okay. Hopefully that's worked.
Should do. Oh. Are we good?
Fabulous.
Oh, don't you love it when a plan comes together?
Absolutely. So over to you, Debbie. Thank you very much indeed.
Okay, thank you, Jill, and thank you, Kathy, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this Jersey event. Okay, so let's get going and see where we're off. Okay, so a bit about me to start with, really. As Jill said, my name is Debbie Garvey. I'm an independent trainer, consultant and author based in Yorkshire. And I often say, you know, I'm Debbie from Leeds. I never intended to write books. I've done this, I worked out the other day that next year I will have been doing this for 35 years, which is ridiculous. I'm 23 in my head and I'm sticking with that. I can't possibly have been doing it this long. So all kinds of different roles, but early childhood throughout my working life. I'm fairly certain that if you chopped off my arm, it would be like a stick of rock and it would say early childhood all the way through it. Never intended to write books about leadership or performance management. But the more I talked to people, the more people said, yeah, Debbie, but it's not the little people that we have the most issues with, it's the big people. So I started to think about, well, okay, how can we help that? How can we help with leadership and management? So I sit kind of at this point with 3 books published and 3 books kind of in the process of, let's say. You'll hear about a couple as we go through. All the quotes and references that I mentioned will be in the briefing paper as we finish pulling that together. And you'll hear a bit more about some of the work that I do. But what's important to know is that it's all based on research. And I'm a big fan of research and independent study that looks at what do we know and understand in early childhood. Okay, so a bit of an introduction. I'm not going to read these out to you. You can kind of see what's there. What I'm hoping it's that through this, that it'll raise lots of questions, some of which that we'll cover in the Q&A, but also questions for you as the people out there who are watching this now or who will watch it later on the video. What does this mean to you? What does this mean to your practice and your role and where you are? You know, thoughts that you can reflect on later. It's a whistle-stop tour in 90 minutes. I will try to get in as much as I possibly can and try and keep the time too. It doesn't matter how many times you rehearse these things, they never quite do the same amount of time. So we'll aim for 90 minutes. It might be a few minutes either way, but we'll see how we go. Okay, so starting off with Neuroscience 101. What do we mean by neuroscience? And this is a very quick overview, and it's a very simple. very simplified version. So this is a really complicated picture of the brain. I'm not going to go through all of this. You can find them fairly easily on the internet. It's just an image to show this is what all the different parts of the brain do. But when we talk about the word neuroscience in education, what we mean is actually a whole combination of a range of sciences. We use biochemistry, we use chemistry, we use psychology, we even use photography. You know, it still amazes me that we can take coloured imaged photographs of newborn babies' brains. We can see what happens when we smile at a newborn baby and they smile back. So without photography, we wouldn't have the neuroscience that the way that we know it in early childhood. So it connects a whole range of sciences that are all involved in one way or another in the various functions of the brain. So this image is just to show the various areas and what bits of them do. So yes, they're all connected. Yes, they all have distinct roles, but the key here is that interconnection. You know, we don't separate it out. You can't have, you know, if we look at the occipital lobe for vision, it's at the back of the head, but the olfactory bit is at the front. So they both need to work together and connect up with different parts of the brain. So the key here is, yes, they're all interconnected. This is the language I tend to use, and kind of really my key message here is don't get too hung up on the language. You'll hear all kinds of different terminology. The brainstem literally is the bit at the back of your head, so you kind of where your spinal column goes into your brain, often called the reptilian brain, and we'll come back to these a bit later, but the limbic system right in the middle, cocooned right in the center of your head, often termed the mammalian brain. And then the cortex or neocortex, which is the big bit at the front. Neo just means new, so it's classed as the newest bit in terms of evolution. So it's where the higher thinking and creativity comes from. So, you know, don't worry about the language, don't worry about the pronunciation. It's just about knowing that there are kind of three key bits, as far as we know at this moment in time. You know, neuroscience expands rapidly just about every time we look into a new piece of research. This is what we know at the minute. This is how it works. Okay, so this next slide is just to look at, it's the bottom scans are what was known as fMRI scans. So the MRI, the way they normally happen, but these can take colour photographs of the brain. And if you see on the bottom one, the one in the middle is of a 1-year-old, and the one at the other side clearly says adult underneath it. And you can see they're not hugely different. And that's really important, that you know, what happens and what we do with children in those very early years lasts. It makes them almost a blueprint, really, for what's coming much later. And you'll know this, you'll have seen this in the media and in things that you've read and engaged with previously. But I just think that this colour fMRI scan shows it incredibly clearly, that importance of those earliest years. So, Kathy talked with great passion at the beginning about what happens when things go wrong. And one of the things that I've talked a lot about recently is about COVID, about how children are being impacted by when things go wrong. Now, the thing about living in the middle of a pandemic is the research that's happening now, it will take us a little while to explore that. It will take us a little while to be able to find out, what does this mean long term? So we have to look at what's already available, what's already there. And one of the biggest studies in terms of adversity in early childhood is the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, the ACE study, which you may have heard of. So just going to explore that a little bit. The ACE study happened in 1989 by two doctors, Folletti and Ander, and a group of others. And the categories have changed over time, but they usually look something like these 10. So the first 5 are personal, the second 5 are related to other family members. Each trauma counts as one, and depending on how many you've got, it's you look at and say, actually, we've got this quite high score here. What the research showed, that early adversity was likely to affect adults in later life. However, this, I think, explains it probably easier than any data that we can look at. So anybody that's looked at Maslow's hierarchy of need will recognise a pyramid shape, and it links very nicely to the Maslow's work. So the adverse childhood experiences happen in that bottom layer. If that bottom layer is not great, if things are difficult in a child's early experiences, it's likely to lead to disrupted neurodevelopment. And we can understand that, that makes sense. If children are having difficulties, it can make it very difficult for children to concentrate, to think about what's going on, which then leads to that middle layer, social, emotional and cognitive impairment. If you can't concentrate, if your brain's all over the place, it can be very difficult to make friends, to self-regulate, and to learn generally. If that continues for a great length of time, that means we're more likely to adopt health risk behaviours. We're more likely to turn to alcohol as a prop. We're more likely to look at smoking as a way out, those kinds of things. If they continue, we're more likely to have disease, disability and social problems, more likely to be an early death. And what the research showed was that people with an ACE score of 6 or more had their lifespan shortened by 20 years. So clearly, the brain and the body are not disconnected. So if we're looking at emotional well-being and how our brains and bodies react to stress are connected, it makes it fairly easy. So if you think about how your stomach feels or your shoulders feel or your head feels when you're really worried or you're really stressed, it makes sense that our physical well-being suffers if our mental well-being is suffering. However, and it's a big however, the science is helping us to understand all of these areas, but things are not always as black and white as they seem. There's something that you may have heard of called neuromyths. That really, a neuromyth starts with a misunderstanding, a misreading, and in some cases, a deliberate warping of science. So you'll have all seen it in the media, on TV. Somebody makes a discovery, and suddenly it's the greatest thing since sliced bread, and we should all be doing it. And it's the science is taken out of context. It's not used in the way that it should be. Things like the brain is so very complex. Our knowledge, despite constant new technologies, is rudimentary. We only know what we know at this moment in time. So we don't fully understand what's going on. We don't fully understand how children's brains work, how our own brains work. We can only work with the information that we've got at the moment. So when I looked into all this for the research behind the books, my take on this was, to explain this debate in simple terms, the dispute comes from people trying to use research to prove that it is only the first 3 years of life that count. This argument implies that any learning and development cannot happen after this, or indeed that damage cannot be repaired later. And that's simply not true. If you think about your own learning journeys, you may well have been frightened of spiders, let's say, as a child, but you've managed to deal with that. You've been supported and helped, and you've now got over that particular fear. Or think about learning to drive. We do learn things as we get older. So it's usually called brain plasticity, so the brain's ability to change. And what we've absolutely proven during a pandemic is that we are adaptable, that we are resilient, that we can change, that we can do things differently. So what's generally acknowledged and agreed is that the early years are incredibly important. And we know that, and those of us that work in early childhood know that only too well. We can make a difference. we can support that brain plasticity. We can help with that. So what does this look like, and what do we need to know? How do we decide which bits of information are helpful? But let's just have a look at how sometimes there's a great deal of confusion about what's being said. Now, I'm sure many of you have seen this image before. It's a CT scan, and the one on the left is a healthy 3-year-old. And like many, I was absolutely horrified when this picture first started appearing everywhere. How could this possibly be happening in the 20th century? However, the image that the majority of us will have seen does not have the writing down the middle and doesn't have the correct reference. Bruce Perry and the Romanian orphanage study is fairly regularly left off. And I happened to be talking to Professor Andy Wilson, who's an emeritus professor at the University College of Lancashire, professor of social work, and another project that I was working on. And he mentioned how he was one of the first social workers to go out to Romania, and he'd seen the horror in the Romanian orphanages. Hang on a minute, that's not how this image is often used. If we look at the writing, the image on the right is from a child in a Romanian orphanage. These children were left for months and months and months and months alone in cots. This was about severe sensory deprivation, severe neglect. But this image became synonymous with the idea of support that within the first 3 years of life is crucial, and that if we don't get it right then, it's irreparable. And yet, other research that we've had since then and is ongoing shows that that isn't true. It shows that the brain is still plastic well into the mid-20s. So that kind of threw my research a little bit, and it made me realise that actually for every argument, there's a counter argument. For every time somebody shouts, yes, this is it, this is what we should be doing, there's somebody else going, no, we shouldn't. So just as Perry's research is often misquoted and misused, there are concerns about other research too. So much so that Dr. Perry actually came out on Twitter and asked people to stop using that particular image. So you can read this later, but the image is taken out of context, best not to use it. So I've used it tonight with this on here as an example of how research is misused. So we need to be aware about that. And I say this about my own books: don't believe everything you read. Just because it's in a book, that's my opinion of something, that's what I believe, doesn't mean you have to agree with me. And this is the same for other research that's out there, and that includes the ACEs research. So while I was doing the research behind the book, I started to have some conversations with people. There's lots of conversations happening around the UK and around the world. And people started to question, well, what about disability or racism or sexism? I'm not going to read all of these out, but what about financial insecurity? What about long-term critical illness or hospitalisation? What about lack of food or clothes or poverty? And I could add to that right now, today, what about living through a pandemic? What about children who are living this right now, with all the things that Kathy was talking about, where those children are struggling, where their parents are struggling? The long-term impacts of this, we have no idea how that's going to happen, or how that's going to kind of pan out as we go forward. We don't know how long this is going to take. So really, this is about saying, okay, we might not know the full picture, we might not know the full story, but there are things that we can do that helps. So after this, a group of professors and academics, including Nadine Burke-Harris, who was one of the big advocates, did a big research study. And what they talked about is children may experience adversity and intervention treatment differently. Research linking mechanisms of child adversity and health outcomes is still underway. Variables need to be controlled, but it's that bottom bit. The concept of resilience was not emphasised in that initial study. How children adapt and thrive. And again, Kathy mentioned how some children are actually saying, I quite like being at home. How some parents are saying, I quite like having more time with our children and being able to do that. So there's a clue in there. It gives us ideas about what we can do. So the research is brilliant, but how can we adapt that? How can we use that for our own day-to-day practice in supporting the children in our care? So that's the science bit. That's the heavy stuff, really, I suppose. How do we keep little brains happy? How do we support emotional well-being in early childhood? I know you have been working incredibly hard in Jersey with one of my favourite people. I was really lucky in one of my previous roles to work on a project with Ferry Lavers and work with the Wellbeing and Involvement Scales. And I just thought this, I'm sure you will have heard him speak. He's one of these people I could listen to all day. But this idea of being like a fish in water is one of his favourite sayings. But just the words in yellow: pleasure, fun, feel at home, radiate vitality, relaxation and inner peace, open and receptive attitude to their environment, spontaneous and comfortable. I don't know about you, but that makes me smile, because that's why we do what we do, isn't it? That's why we work with children. It's why we splash in puddles. It's why we get messy with pain. It's why we do all those brilliant things that help children to feel like a fish in water. And if we think about that, fish have no restrictions, no barriers. They move with the ebb and the flow of the water. And so how do we help children's brains to feel like that? How do we help children's brains to feel like a fish in water? So I promised you we'd go back to what the brain does and different bits of it. The reptilian brain needs its own space. It needs to feel physically comfortable. It needs to know what happens next, and it needs people who help us feel safe. So that's the limbic system, that's the brainstem, that's the bit kind of at the back of your head. It needs to know everything's okay. The RAS filter needs things that it likes, its interest, it's relevant, it's motivating, it holds its attention, so things that are exciting. The mammalian brain needs the 5 senses: memories, sense of identity and belonging, positive emotions, and belief in ourselves. And the neocortex needs opportunity for choices, decision making, interaction, connections, unusual objects, time to think. And when we see this like this, I think this is really comforting, because this is emotional health and well-being, but this is also development matters. This is about being unique, enabling environments and positive relationships, which equal learning and development, and we know that. But it's a big but. This doesn't happen on its own. Brains need to feel safe. And there's one thing on here that we haven't mentioned yet so far, and that's the RAS filter. And it's very, very rarely talked about. And so it's one of the things I want to explore a little bit, and what the RAS filter does and where it sits and what its role is in how we help children and their little brains to feel safe. So, same picture as before, same slide, but I'm going to do some slightly different things with this one. So reptilian's brain's there, so you can actually feel it. If you touch the back of your head, you can feel where that lump is. So the reptilian brain is there. It responds to the fight, flight, freeze mode, and it tells us whether we feel safe or not. Then we've got the mammalian brain, cocooned, as I said, snuggled in the middle, all nice and safe. Cortex, or neocortex, at the top, where the learning and thinking happens. Key message here: there's only one way that messages can get into the brain, and that's through one of the 5 senses. We either see, hear, taste, touch, or smell something, and that message then goes to the brain. So if you think about it, when you touch something hot, that message travels incredibly quickly up through all your nerves into your brain and tells you to pull your hand away. You don't even have to think about it, it just does it. So see, hear, taste, touch, or smell. And again, I think in early years and early childhood, we've got an advantage here because we understand that the majority of our practice is set up to respond to children's 5 senses. Then we've got the RAS filter, and it sits right there, right at the top of the brainstem. So it needs things it likes, it's interesting, that it's relevant, that's motivating, that holds its attention. If those things are not happening, the RAS filter shuts down. So imagine it's full, I can never say it's full word, reticulator activating system is its correct term. And basically it means net-like, it's Latin for net-like. So you imagine there's a net of nerves that sit at the top of your spinal column that go, actually, this is really boring. We're not going to listen. We're not going to take any notice. But it also is a key component in that fight, flight or freeze mode. It tells the brain, actually, this is really scary. We're going to keep all the other information at bay while you deal with that fight, flight or freeze mode. You decide what you're going to do. So the brain has time to think about it. So you can see straight away that if a child is feeling stressed, if a child's feeling worried, the RAS filters close down, and then we say, right, come on, children, sit and learn, sit and listen, think about what we're going to do. And the child's still sitting there thinking, yeah, but I've had a horrendous journey here, and mummy was shouting, and daddy dropped the eggs, and the world's chaos this morning. And I still need time to come down and think about what it is that's gone on before I can concentrate on what's happening in the here and now. So, in other words, when the brain stem senses a threat, it shuts down. So that fight, flight or freeze mode that we hear mentioned so much. The brain has to decide in a very, very quick space of time, can I fight this threat? Am I big enough to fight it? Can I flight from it? Can I run away? Can I outrun it? Or can I stand really quiet, still, and hope that it'll walk past me and nobody will notice? In terms of early childhood, the RAS filter closing down affects the next part of the brain, where memories, self-worth, self-confidence, self-regulation, and then on to the cortex, the neocortex, where the thinking and learning and so on happens. It's okay for short-term stress, because if you think about when children are trying to concentrate on something, having that closed down can help them to go, right, actually I need to concentrate on this particular thing. It's okay, it'll be fine, I can concentrate. When it's long-term, what we call toxic stress, when that stress doesn't go away, that's a different story. That's when children's memory, self-worth, self-confidence, self-regulation gets to be affected. And we start to see that come out in a whole range of behaviours that we maybe not want to see. So the brain sends a message, this is going on, and the RAS filter reacts. The threat can be real, so big things like war, famine, abuse, poverty, living in a pandemic. Or it can be seeing things that are really insignificant to us. Someone else is playing with your favourite toy, changing your routine, your favourite key person is off sick. But they can also be perceived, the things that you think might happen, uncertainty, worries, fear, that what if that happens? Which brings us to now, and what Kathy was talking about in COVID-19. Children hear adults talking all the time, they see the news, they pick up on our anxieties and worries, whether we say them out loud or not. Children are very good at reading body language and facial expressions, tone of voice. We know that from tiny babies. If you've ever smiled at a tiny baby, they do it back. Children are born ready to imitate our body language. So children are hearing all of this. They're seeing all of this. They're seeing the signs in the shops. As Kathy said, the playgrounds are closed. Why can't I play on the playground? They're seeing the constant hand washing. And if that's also in a home environment that's also quite difficult, where parents are struggling, just because they're living through a a pandemic, not for any other reason, just that it's hard enough living through a pandemic. Or if they're coming into settings, and again, as Kathy said, staff are feeling stressed and worried because they're not seeing colleagues and things are hard, and trying to deal with what's going on to make places COVID secure. Children are picking up on this and they can see what's going on around them. So yes, little brains need to feel safe, but it's the adults around children that make that happen, or not, as the case may be. So that brings us quite nicely onto the role of adults, and how do we help? How do we do this? Loved that Bill mentioned Chris and Tony, Chris Pascal and Tony Bertram at CREC. Highly recommend reading some of their stuff if you haven't before. But this is one of their studies that came out in 2016, and they were asked by the English Department for Education to look at a group of 40 boys who had outperformed their peers academically at the end of the foundation stage profile. And the DFE were very interested, why has this happened? And Chris and Tony did some preliminary research and then went back to the DFE and said, actually, we need more access. We need more access to the people around them, around these children. We need to look at why this happened. And so they were given unprecedented access. They spoke to the teachers of the children in the reception classes. They spoke to the practitioners in the nurseries and the settings and childminders or nannies where the children had attended, and they spoke to parents. And what they found, this group of 40 boys were outperforming peers who had their names down for future Eton, Cambridge places. And that the majority of them were living in quite chaotic home lives. But what Chris and Tony found was that strong, secure and trusting attachments of young boys to key adults is critical to healthy development, resilience and well-being. So regardless of what was going on at home and how difficult that was, each of those little boys had somebody in their life that was making a difference. What Chris and Tony call protective factors. So that supported, buffering adult who helped those children to feel emotionally secure and resilient. So this idea of some of the screens that previously, this idea of toxic stress, even though these children had some quite difficult, toxic, stressful home lives, they had somebody who made a difference, as somebody who made them feel emotionally secure and resilient. So I think that's really positive. And I think personally, and I say this to Chris and Tony all the time, but this research should be given to absolutely anybody and everybody that does anything in early childhood. The CREC website has got lots of videos on, it's got lots of tips and tricks and ideas on, it's got lots of reports on. So, you know, if you get a chance, go and have a read of it, because there's some really, really exciting stuff on there. Okay, this one. So back to the ACEs, the Adverse Childhood Experiences. Some of you may have heard of the Resilience documentary. And the man in the blue shirt is Dr. Jack Shonkoff from the Developing Child Centre at Harvard University. What he talks about is scientific research points to the presence of a stable, caring adult in a child's life as the key to building the skills of resilience. Again, note that word adult. The Hawke study was also adult. This is also adult. It's not always the parent. Sometimes it's you. It's the people who are watching and listening to this. It's us in early childhood. We make such a huge difference to how children cope. This one. This is from Professor Francis McGloin at Liverpool John Moores University. And I spotted this article in Times Ed. And the headline for it was something like, not touching children is another form of abuse. It was like, oh, I think I need to read this. This looks very interesting. And reading the article, I got more and more excited about Francis's work. And so I contacted him and said, please, would he talk to me? This was when I was writing the last two books. And this is from the article, but touch isn't just good, it's absolutely essential. Denying it is like denying a child oxygen. It's cruel in my mind, it's another form of abuse. I'm not talking psycho nonsense, I'm talking proper evidenced neuroscience. So I managed to get a meeting with Francis, and I asked him to explain to me where this had come from. And he doesn't work with children, he doesn't work in early childhood, he is a head of effective neuroscience, he's a professor of neuroscience. And what he actually covers is something called CT fibers. So if you put your hand in front of you, I can't see you on video, so it's only me that's going to look silly. If you put your hand in front of you, inside your skin, you have 3 lots of nerves. So you have what Francis calls the motorways, nerves. So those are the ones that respond very, very quickly and tell your brain incredibly quickly that you need to do something. Those are the ones that tell you when you've touched the kettle and it's hot, or you've put your hand too close to the steam iron. They go straight through, quick to your brain, move your hand away, you're burning. And you've got the B roads, what Francis calls the B roads. So that they're like dual carriageways. They take a little bit longer to get there, the message, but they get there in the end. The CT fibers, which is what Francis particularly studies, are the very slow ones. They're the ones that feel that. So if you're all doing this now, they take a bit longer. So your brain registers it, but it takes a little bit longer. It's a bit like going on the country roads, is how Francis describes it. And what he talks about is that is the feeling that you get when you're being hugged, when you're being cuddled, when we cuddle children. So he talks about it as the touch between a caregiver and a small child, or with an elderly parent in a care home or something like that. What Francis can prove without doubt is that when children and grown-ups' brains react to that from someone that they feel safe with, it lights up the emotion center of your brain, the bit that responds to feeling safe and feeling loved and feeling valued, the bit that responds to where the resilience comes from. So one of the things that worries me currently is that I see on social media a lot is we're going to teach the children resilience. That doesn't particularly work. What we're looking for is resilience is built from within, and resilience is only built when you feel safe and cared for and loved. And I think that's quite exciting, because again, that's what we do in early childhood. We can work with this. What we do works. Cuddling, snuggling, reading a book, singing songs and rhymes, playing outside in all weathers, looking at signs and symbols, pretend play, messy play, opportunity, recognition, interaction, modelling. You'll get all of this. I know you've been doing Making It Real. One of the things I do for NCB's Making It Real trainer. So I know you're getting all of this. I know you're absolutely engaged with all of this. It's what we do every day: painting, gluing, sticking, singing songs, telling stories, telling rhymes. It's what we do every single day, all day, every day. And all of those things help little brains feel loved and valued and safe. And I hope you're cheering, because this is it. And it almost sounds too simple. But if I just go back a slide, I don't know how to go back. Oh, I don't know how to go back. No, wrong way. Do it that way. I know how to do it that way. Go back. This is from a head of effective neuroscience. This isn't somebody who works in early childhood or works in education. This is somebody who studies how our nerves respond to different things and which parts of the brain it lights up. So, as he says, incontrovertible, proper evidence neuroscience, that all of this makes a huge, huge difference to children. So I think that's quite exciting, and that gets me very excited about what we do. And then this, love, that word love. Some of you may have heard of Dr. Jules Page and the work, her lifelong work in terms of professional love. And what she talks about is the language to appropriately describe the close, loving, intimate and affectionate bond which is developed with children in care, in our care. And she gets this, she understands this. And again, if you haven't looked at Jules Page's work, it's absolutely worth having a look at. And again, that's what we do every single day. We form those close, loving, intimate and affectionate bonds with children. And if we don't, then I actually think we're in the wrong job. Which brings us nicely on to, so what about the grown-ups? As I said at the beginning, I never intended to write a book about performance management in early childhood. I never intended to write a book about leadership in early childhood. It kind of happened by accident, as more and more people said to me, but actually, Debbie, it's the big people that we struggle with. And the more I thought about this and the more I looked into the research behind it, the more I found some striking similarities. So as grown-ups, we have to deal with all of this. The anxiety, the stress, the worry, fear, pain. And the more I looked into it, the more I explored the neuroscience behind it, the more I realized that actually this is about humans. So we've looked at what keeps little brains happy, but, and again, it's a big but, adults' brains work in pretty much the same way. We might have more understanding, we might have more experience and so on, but at a biological level, our brains still respond to that fight, flight, freeze, and we still react in the same way. So if you think about it, when you're stressed, when you're worried, when things are all getting a bit much on top of you, and then somebody rings you up and asks you to concentrate or asks you to give them the answer to something that they've been looking for, it's incredibly difficult. Our own self-regulation skills are tested to the absolute limits, and certainly living through a pandemic, it's incredibly difficult at times to concentrate. It's incredibly difficult to engage with what's going on, because at the back of our heads, there's that huge, huge worry, that huge fear of what's actually going on. What do we do? So again, there's a really simple message here. Everything we've covered works for us too. We need to play. We need to have cuddles and hugs. If you're a cuddly, huggy person, some people don't like it, but if you do, we need time out to just think and be. So if you enjoy reading or crocheting or baking or whatever it is, the things that make you happy, the things that help the bit of your brain to light up that makes you feel safe and valued and loved. You know, the very, very similar reactions to what we get in children. And it works whether those fears are real or imagined. So we can learn and we can support our brains to go, hang on, that's not a real fear. And we can help to kind of keep it under control and help to regulate our own emotions. So they work. So again, I think that's really helpful. We've almost got put forward in early childhood, because we understand that, we get that, we understand where it goes, you know, how we do it. So I think there's a balancing act here. And okay, I know it's a little bit cheesy using pictures of my own books, but there's a reason for that. Everything I do is about improving experiences for children and families. And you can't achieve that without improving experiences for staff. That's why there's two books. They were written at virtually the same time and caused my publisher all kinds of problems, because the first chapter in each book is almost identical. So there was lots of issues around whether I was plagiarizing myself or not. It's like, but if this is talking about neuroscience, we're talking about humans, whether they're little humans or big humans. So they're of equal importance, and both books cover everything that we've talked about here. And I always get a little bit embarrassed talking about my books because it makes me sound like J.K. Rowling and there's a hidden Scottish castle and millions in the bank, and it's really not like that when you write an academic book. My dad jokes regularly, when are you going to write a proper book? You write academic books because there's so much that you want to share that you hope other people will find interesting. They do both cover it, because we can't have one without the other. So all the research I've done shows that relationships, personal development, training, and staff support, such as supervision and the right environment, equals quality outcomes for children and families. But equally, relationships, personal development, training, staff support, such as supervision and the right environment, equals quality outcomes for practitioners and staff. And my message is really simple. You can't have one without the other. So how do we do that? How do we help staff to feel okay? But this is what I'm terming a positive performance management model. I think sadly, performance management has had a very, very negative press, particularly in the early childhood field. I've yet to meet anyone who's ever said to me, "Oh, Debbie, I love performance management. I can't wait to do it." We didn't come into these jobs, a lot of us, to manage staff and lead staff. We came into these jobs to work with small children. So this is kind of my model. When you write a book, there has to be an order. And I get that this isn't linear. You know, you might do a lot of number 3 and then have to jump to number 7, and then you might go back to number 4. There's got to be, so I use this order for the book because it kind of made sense. Sadly, performance management's only considered when things go wrong, or for disciplinary or dismissal. So and that's a shame. You know, if we looked at this in the wider sense of a positive performance management model, we could do it in a very different way. So here's a thought. If we saw staff as unique individuals working in enabling environments, supported and challenged by positive relationships, maybe we wouldn't need the more difficult negative stuff. Could we call it a learning journey for grown-ups? I believe we've definitely got the upper hand here in this sector. We understand how to support children to feel emotionally secure and resilient. It feels comfortable. We understand it. We get it. So why can't we just transfer those skills when working with colleagues? I'm not saying we should treat grown-ups like children. What I'm saying is we can use those same skills. Those skills are very transferable. Performance management doesn't have to be and shouldn't be negative. You know, if we think about it as a child example, if we had a child who wasn't settling in a setting, we'd put a plan in place, we'd support, we'd encourage. And ultimately, if it really didn't work, we might look at moving that child somewhere else. And it would all be seen in the best interest of the child. So why does it seem so different when we look at it at grown-ups? We're maybe just not quite in the right job. So if we know that all of these things that we've talked about make children feel loved, safe and valued, then surely it works for big brains too. The CIPCD, again, really, really useful organisation to look at. Chartered Institute for Professional Development. Sounds, nothing like we would look at in early childhood, but actually incredibly helpful. They do lots of free resources. You do have to join with an email, but you don't have to pay for anything to get to their basic information. What they talk about is organisations that genuinely promote and value the health and well-being of employees will benefit from improved engagement and retention and consequent gains in performance. In other words, people who feel happy and well and loved and safe and cared for at work are more likely to do a better job. This is not about tick boxes to say we've done well-being. But in such challenging time as the here and now, it can be quite difficult. And I recognise that anxiety and worry and stress and fear that so many of us are experiencing is there and present. How do we move forward? What can we do that helps? just get to the rescue. Just a bit of reassurance, really. Children haven't changed. What children need hasn't changed. We have the knowledge, the experience, and the skills. We just have to believe that we do. We get well-being and involvement. Observation, 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 and then more observation. We know by watching children what that tells us, how that supports us to do what we need to be able to do. Being outdoors, time and time and time and time again, the research is showing that being outdoors makes a huge, huge difference. Stories and rhymes, again, all of these things, through the Making It Real program that you've been doing, make a huge difference to how children feel. Play, play, play. Oh, yeah, and then more play. Puddle's rule, you've got this. You get this. You know what this is about. And all of those skills that we use are equally accessible in things that we do with grown-ups, and how we help each other to play, how we help each other being outdoors, how we help each other with well-being and involvement. All of those things are equally useful to grown-ups. This is my all-time favourite quote. I put it into every single thing that I do. Yuri Bronfenbrenner. One simple key message. It's the bit underlined in the middle of the screen. Every child needs at least one adult who's irrationally crazy about him or her. That's number one. It almost sounds too simple, but all the research is showing that this is true. And I think it's truly amazing. We've made such an impact in children's lives. It's why we came into these jobs, why we're part of this. It doesn't matter who we are, where we're born, what life is thrown at us that counts. It's what we do as adults to help build resilience, to help children feel loved and valued. And it's regardless of background. It doesn't matter what job role you're in. It's regardless of professional heritage. It isn't always parents. I just want you to close your eyes for a second. Just think back to your childhood. Who was that irrationally crazy adult? Who was there for you? What did they do? And the chances are they did a lot of things that we've talked about. It's hard on video doing this. Normally when I do this in a conference room, I can see everybody smiling. I'm hoping that you're all smiling. Now think forwards. If in 30, 40, 50 years' time, I'm hoping I've retired, but somebody else says in the future and asks a group of adults this same question, how powerful is it that the person that they think of when they close their eyes is you? A lot of us will be able to remember the early childhood teachers and practitioners and nannies and childminders that we had when we were little. And I think that's incredibly powerful. So, as the saying goes, we need to practice what we preach. Can't pour from an empty cup. We need to look after us. I picked this picture on purpose. Concentrate on a bit of it that makes sense to you, whether it's a tree, or the mountains, or the water, or the sky. Look at it, and there's something really simple that you can do that's been scientifically proven to bring down the stress level of the hormone cortisol. Not difficult, you don't have to count. All you have to do is concentrate on that bit of the picture, breathe in, and then out. Okay, so this is a really simple mindfulness technique, and a lot of people think mindfulness is airy-fairy, but actually the latest research is showing that people who practice breathing techniques and mindfulness for 30 minutes a day, their brains look different, the grey matter is thicker, and how they react to things is very different. So again, these are not people in early childhood. This is not psychobabble. These are scientists who are studying how the brain reacts to particular things. In terms of where we are now, at the moment, those breathing techniques are incredibly simple. You can do them wherever you are. There's loads on the internet. They help with sleeping, they help with anxiety levels, and children can do them too. And it's very, very simple, and it's really easy to explain to children. So go and have a look at some of those, some of the mindfulness stuff that's out there, and look at how you can make sure your cup is topped up. So I'm hoping I've done okay with time. I've got no idea, Joel, I'm really sorry. Nearly finished. So just to finish, I just want to say thank you to all of you. Throughout all of this chaos, this uncertainty, this difficulty, you've kept the philosophy at the heart of what we do. You've answered thousands of worried questions. You've helped wash thousands of hands. You've probably filled in thousands of forms. You've reassured thousands of families, supported thousands of colleagues, and given children thousands of hugs despite what's been thrown at us. You've kept children and families at the heart of what you do. And for that, I thank each and every one of you, because you're the ones that are out there doing this. So thank you. Any questions?
Debbie, that was absolutely stunning. I amazed in terms of the absolute breadth of your coverage, from starting with Neuroscience Made Easy, looking at that ACEs pyramid, the neuromyths, you know, all the research that you've pulled together so aptly and so relevantly in terms of this evening's seminar. And I love the fact that you quoted one of my favorite websites, which is Harvard University. And for anybody who's not aware of it, just Google developingchild.net. And you get straight through to Harvard, all the latest thinking about
Fabulous.
Science, etc. Absolutely stunning. So, you know, the fact that you were linking that through, and it's really interesting because when I checked out their latest research fairly recently, you know, they were talking about, you know, what is the new news in this area? And very much it's about the importance of relationships.
Yeah.
You know, and that resilience requires relationships. It's those reliable, supportive relationships, and the multiple opportunities as well for developing coping skills that are really the essential building blocks. And they're going to be the things that I think strengthen children, practitioners, families, etc., you know, to do well in the face of significant anxiety. Thinking about the present situation that we're in. And I think also what you've done, I am going to give people an opportunity to ask questions in a minute, but I also want to just reflect for a minute in terms of what I think you've done is you've pulled together what I would consider to be the game changers, apart from a vaccine, of course, that actually will make the biggest difference in terms of young children going forwards, as you expressed it, and thinking about what are the key ingredients for healthy development. So well done, Debbie. Huge
thank you.
Right, I'm now going to open up the chat. I think people are probably spellbound, so they couldn't take the time to stop to post a question in the chat, I suspect. But now is everybody's opportunity to reflect for a minute, you know, to think that we are in a crisis situation, you know, it's presenting us all with a whole new and varied set of challenges and issues. You know, all our lives have been turned upside down. not least so the next generation of children. So what's your questions for Debbie, who will, I'm sure, give her time very willingly now, because she's so rattled through that and raced through it that we've now got time to take questions.
Every time I've practiced it, it's come out at a different time. So I gave up, I stopped worrying about at the time and just thought, I'll just do what it is and then we'll see where we are.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just great. So what questions do we have? Anybody going to post a start of 10 question in the chat? I think people are perhaps just stunned into silence. So let me pose one, Debbie, perhaps, just to get other people started to think. One of my concerns at the minute is what I'm currently calling the yo-yo effect of children being in and out of settings, whether that's school, whether that's nurseries, you know, whatever kind of setting, childminders anywhere, where they've settled in and then for all manner of different reasons at the present time, social distancing, whatever, they've then had to self-isolate, or families have. And I just wonder what your thinking is around how we can actually manage that in the most effective way.
I think one of the key things for all children at the minute is continuity. So I don't think we should be changing environments hugely. I'm really worried about Christmas. Jill will tell you I'm a huge Christmas fan. I am known as Mrs. Christmas, but I am worried about the impact of the sudden change to suddenly glitter everywhere, when actually what these children need is the things that look the same as before. And I'm not saying don't do Christmas, but we need to have that, that continuous provision that we have out as much as we can, so that the things that were there last week are still there next week and the week after. Even if that child's had a gap, that they can come in and say, well, actually, yes, I remember this because this was there when I left. So that I can come back in. It's a bit like, you know, if you'd been ill for a fortnight and while you were in your bed, your lovely partner had decided to redecorate your entire house and move all your furniture around. You know, when you come back downstairs, you're going to be thinking, well, it doesn't look like how I left it. So I think there's a lot to do in terms of that continuous provision and keeping that as consistent as we can for children, because again, that's one of the things that helps children to feel safe. Children like routines, and I'm not saying we should be routining children to within an inch of their life, but that they know this is what it looks like. It's still going to look like that when I come back in 2 weeks' time. This is still going to be there.
Yeah, sure. And that's the security element, isn't it? Very for children. Yeah, sure. And that's why I suppose my anxiety is this kind of yo-yo effect on children's learning and development, you know, when changes are happening. And we as adults are finding it difficult and don't know what's going to be happening one day to the next. Right, we've got a question from Vicky, who's saying, is there much information or research on how to manage endings of children and young people's relationships with professionals? That's the first part of the question, and the impact that these endings can have on children and young people.
I don't know if there's anything specifically on children, but there's a lot of research on endings and transition, which is basically what it is a transition to another room within the building, or another room, you know, another building altogether, or a different provider. And there's certainly lots of work around transitions. I think Chris and Tony at CREC have done some work around transitions. I think under the current climate, I think transitions are going to have to be handled a lot more carefully, because the change is perhaps going to be greater for children. It's going to feel greater that we're having to do virtual tours of new buildings and all of that. So I think allowing longer transitions for children is going to be incredibly important. I'm a big believer, Kathy, in being honest with children. Huge believer in being honest with children, and there is nothing wrong with saying to children, I'm sad too that you're going, and I'm going to miss you too, and so what can we do to try and help that? You know, could we take a photograph? Could I don't know if people have heard of key person treasure boxes. So yeah, so Kathy's nothing, but you could have an exit treasure box. You could have something that the child can take with them as part of that ending. So a photograph of the key person, you know, a card that the key person's made, a picture that they've made together, those kinds of things that the child can take with them. I think transitional objects are going to become incredibly important for children. You know, so anything like that. A lot of what I do, I talk a lot about how would you feel? How would you feel as a grown-up? What would you want somebody to do to you? Or what would you want somebody not to do to you? If it makes you feel uncomfortable as a grown-up, then don't do it to children. And if, you know, if I was having to leave something, I'd want somebody to be honest with me. I'd want somebody to give me a memory, something that I could take with me that says, actually, I can look at this whenever I want, and I've got that there. The other thing that might be worth looking at is things like transition curves, which is business stuff really, but it's all really relevant. So things like Fisher's transition curve and the Kubler-Ross grief curve, because for children it is like a grief, it's a loss, because I'm having to move away. It is for us when, you know, when we lose a relationship, when we have a breakup from a relationship. So I don't know if I've gone completely off on tangent. What was the lady's name?
Vicky.
Vicky, did that answer it, Vicky? Or have I gone off on tangent? Because I do that.
Oh, just while going to be...
Yes, thank you, she said.
Yes, thank you. So that's great. I was just going to add a couple of examples in, and these are both Northwest England examples. Is that we had one local authority here that in the summer term created memory boxes for every child at a point of transition. And so actually they collated all the information, and that was the child's then to own at that point of transition.
Yes, I've heard them called, I think I use the term key work treasure boxes, but they work, they absolutely work. They work for children coming in, if you want to send one home, for the child to get to know the key people before they come in, and they work at the other end as well, both ends. Yeah. It's a memory box, isn't it, really?
Yeah, that's right. And, you know, people will know that I'm a fan of All About Me, in terms of, you know, a one-page profile that the child owns that tells you just on one side of A4 about that child, you know, the things that support them, the things that matter to them, the unique identifier of the photograph, etc. And actually that is so helpful at a point of transition. You know, we've got an authority here that every child across primary school has one of those, so that, you know, as an introduction to from moving from one class to another, that's updated on a regular basis. And I think they're really helpful. Okay, so any other questions popping up in the chat? They stun people into silence, Debbie, I really do.
They've got my details on the end of the slides. If people want to get in touch later, they can.
I've put a question there. Can you see it, Kathy?
Yes, I have. Thank you, Octavia. Okay, so Octavia from NCB has a question about the research that corrected about children, particularly boys, who'd outperformed their peers, and it was attributed to a relationship they had. And her question is, was there anything about what that relationship consisted of in terms of any commonalities? And also in terms of using that research to inform practice, can that research be replicated with a practitioner rather than somebody in the family?
Yes, 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 yes. I shout about the Hawke study every time I get opportunity. It's in every book, and it will be in every future book. I cannot believe it hasn't been shouted about as loudly as I think it should be. I think it should be one of the seminal pieces of research that we look at. So yes, Octavia, it was very, very clear. What happened was that the person, whoever that person was, listened to the child, took an interest in whatever the child was interested in, and supported them to do it. Dead simple. Again, it almost sounds too simple, but yes, it can be replicated. The Hawk website, on the correct website, is fantastic. The videos that are on there, and in terms of who that person was, it nearly always was the early years practitioner. If it was the parent, they all cited the fact that they'd had support from an early childhood practitioner, and that without that practitioner, they wouldn't have been able to support their own children. So some of the chaos that was going on in the parents' lives was just horrific. That they had somebody in that child's life that they could go to and say, I need some help with this. And it was nearly always the early childhood practitioner played a huge role.
Okay, thanks, Debbie. I've got a couple more questions. So I've got one from Julie saying that she worries about when we talk about observations, we're thinking about gathering evidence rather than thinking about how we can engage and have quality interactions. So I suppose that's a question for comment, really.
Yeah, just a comment, isn't it? I agree with you, Julie. When I said observation, it's about just sit and watch, get involved, sit down there at children's level and look and see what's going on and get involved with it, rather than reams and reams of paperwork that nobody ever looks at. And
Okay, thanks for that.
Really agree.
Yeah, and another question that's come in is, and I think this is a really relevant one. You've shared a lot of important messages tonight, and while we have got some parents in the audience is primarily practitioners from a whole range of different services, schools, settings in Jersey. But the question is, how can these important messages be shared with parents?
One of the things that Sarah from NCB and I are trying to do is put together a briefing paper, and I'm going to hold my hands up publicly and say it's all my fault that it's not ready, because I've had so many conflicting deadlines this week. I'm hoping it'll be sorted for Friday. One of the things that we're going to do on there is put a little bit about how you can share those messages with parents. There is a wonderful video called The Brain's Journey to Resilience, freely available from YouTube or online. It's the Alberta Family Wellness. We'll put the link on the briefing paper. It's a 10-minute cartoon video that is incredibly engaging. It's quite humorous, it's quite funny, and you can show it to parents, you can send it to parents, they can watch it on their iPhones or on the tablets. It's just brilliant, and it does in 10 minutes what all this research has failed to do for the last 30 years. It engages with people, and it helps parents to see. It's good for anybody, but I particularly like it for working with parents with, and we'll put the links on, but it's my fault that the briefing paper's not ready. We were hoping it was going to be done tonight, and we just completely ran out of time. I ran out of time. It's my fault.
Not an issue. I've got a lovely comment in the chat, Debbie, which says, so thank you so much, Debbie. I think we're all so lucky to be such a key person in so many children's lives.
Yeah.
And she then goes on to say, how can we work with parents in a supportive and caring role, especially where these families and parents might be reluctant to work with a school, even if it's the best for their children?
So again, one of the things I talk about a lot, as I said earlier, is I talk about how do I feel. So I can't remember which book, in one of the books, there's a reflective practice exercise where I say, think about all the invites that you get outside of a pandemic, but all the invites you get invited to weddings, you get invited to nights out, you get invited to Christmas do's, a whole host of different things. Some of them you go to willingly, carrying the bottles of gin, skipping down the road. Yes, I'm definitely going to this one. Some of them you kind of go and think, really don't want to go to this, but I'm dragging myself there. Others you just don't go to. think about why you don't go, why don't you engage or want to engage with those particular events, and then look at your parent cohort. What is it that's going on that's making it difficult for them to engage? I mean, you and I, Kathy, are both Peel trainers, you know, that whole message from Peel. It's not that parents aren't interested in their children, it's that there are other things going on, and that for whatever reason at that moment in time, it makes it difficult for them to get involved and to get engaged with. I've never yet met a parent, and I'm sure you haven't either, Kathy. I've never met a parent that doesn't care. They just have a load of other stuff that gets in the way. So, you know, how do we do that?
Fundamentally, you know, parents I'm absolutely confident want the best for their child.
Yeah.
You know, they don't always know how to do it. They have lots of other things on. But I think it's about thinking about how we make the approach, you know, and it's all about how we behave as practitioners that will actually mean that parents see us as friendly professionals. And I think, you know, that would always be the term that I would use in terms of, you know, thinking about how we actually engage with those parents who might find it just more difficult. Okay, so any further questions? Okay, well, I'm just going to talk for a minute about a reflection from a piece of work that I've just read. And if there are any more questions, we can continue to take them. If not, we'll wrap up. So recently I've been reading some work around supervision. And there's a lovely quote that says, taking the time out can enable us to renew our energy and to bring a greater clarity to our work. And from the quality of people's presence together, make the space for something new and perhaps life-changing to happen. And I think what we've had tonight is that Debbie has very thoughtfully and very carefully opened up this space, this conversation around neuroscience in a very accessible way. So what I'd like to do is to challenge everybody who's attended, and there's been, I think it was 92 people, you know, as part of this audience, to challenge everybody to use what you've learned this evening to do something that will change the lives of Jersey's youngest citizens and their families for the better.